In June of this year, we were introduced to Ninjago Monstrosity, a much more darker take on the Ninjago brand, and we get to see the journey of Kai after the events of the merge in the Land of Monsters. And a lot of people really did like this miniseries and hope that we did get more. And it turns out that we did. We actually have gotten a follow-up in the last few weeks by the name of Kai's Monstrous Journey, and it is a actual sequel to Monstrosity. And it is much more light-hearted, it's not in black and white, and it's also in the animation style of the Wildfire shorts. But the real question I feel like a lot of people are wondering is, does it hold up to the original 3 episodes of Monstrosity? And now, of course, before we go any further, I am going to specify that there is, of course, spoilers. If you have not watched the episode so far, I would recommend you go and do so, because ultimately, I would rather you experience them for yourselves and have your own opinion. This is ultimately just my own thoughts. But from here onwards, I'm going to talk about each and every single one of these shorts without any sort of holding back. So you have been warned. But let me actually give you a brief overview on what each of the shorts actually had in them, and then I'll go more into my opinion. The first one is called The Forest of the Teeth, and it shows that Wildfire has discovered Kai's time in the Land of Monsters, and she has asked him to show him what actually happened during that time. And we get to see presumably what happens directly after Monstrosity. Kai is trying to fly out of the land with Diadon, and he eventually ends up actually having a crash where the plant life is trying to attack him, and a little creature actually does attempt to link up to him and gives him a power boost. Cue a fight scene where he is trying to protect both the creature that he has discovered and Diadon the dragon, where he realizes elemental power is useless, but at least with the help of the creature, he is able to defeat the enemy, and he learns to trust this new creature that he has found. And as they walk off, there is a person in the background who laughs away, and ultimately it fades back to Kai noting that it is the only beginning. The second short in these 3 is called The Ruins, where Kai is continuing on his journey to be able to leave the Land of Monsters, but during that time, he comes face to face with this horrifying creature, this kind of monstrous pig looking thing, and he attempts to fight it away, and when he is not successful, Fuzz again begins to help him by powering him up, but it's still not enough, so a mysterious stranger by the name of Bolson, who was the one stalking him in the short before, actually comes out and helps him. But when that actually happens and they defeat the monster, another set of monsters takes away Diadon, and Kai, realizing that it's a trap, goes to save the dragon anyways. During that fight though, again, like the short before, we do get Wildfire also commentating the fact that she believes that what it was a trap as well, and Kai alludes to the fact that it was much worse than Wildfire is even realizing, and that is where the second one officially ends. And then the third one is Queen of the Monsters, where we find Kai, Dawson, and Fuzz all going towards the Queen of the Monsters, and when they are there, a bunch of different backstabbing ensues, because Fuzz is revealed to be the child of the Queen, Dawson's revealed to be the puppet of the Queen, and everyone's allegiances just seems to switch in, because Fuzz then betrays his mother, and then Dawson betrays the Queen of the Monsters, and everyone just betrays each other. But then in the end, the day is saved, Kai is no longer being affected by Fuzz, and Fuzz runs off, and Kai says there are plenty more journeys that he had in the land, essentially setting up any sort of sequel. But that is what happens essentially in the short, and what do I necessarily think of it? Because I've been very curious on what the overall consensus was when it comes to these shorts. Because Monstrosity was so popular, I wondered if people thought this was a worthy successor. But over anything, do I think it was? To start off with, possibly the most important aspect above all else is of course going to be Kai. Kai has been one of the more debatable parts when it comes to these shorts, because people seem to be in one of two minds on where he should have been at. Some people believe that Kai was way too trusting of Fuzz and way too trusting of Dawson as well, even though he knew that what he was walking into was not a good thing, but people noted that Kai at the end saying that Dawson could go with him just felt weirdly too trusting when it came to Kai, especially considering it's not long after Monstrosity. Whereas other people have said that this feels way too weird of Kai, because Kai shouldn't have been anywhere near as nice as he was considering the events of Monstrosity. So you have people who thought that he would be one way, and a lot of people thought he would be the other. And honestly, I just don't really agree with either of these notions. I think a lot of people who think Kai should either have been too trusting or Kai was not trusting enough, I think it kind of has to be both. And I think the writers kind of set this up at the same time. Remember, if Monstrosity happened literally as these shorts began, you would stand to reason that he kind of wouldn't be either. Because Kai wasn't near the point he was, or as anywhere near as trusting as he was in the show itself, or at least before the event of the merge. On the other hand, Monstrosity did teach Kai that he can trust people again, and there was good people still out there, mainly Diadon, the Fire Knight, and everyone that he did encounter who was actually a good person within the original Monstrosity shorts. So I honestly think it stands to believe that Kai was actually kind of in a decent place when it comes to his level of trust. I do think he leans more towards too trusting if I had to pick a side, but at the same time, remember, Kai trusts Fuzz because Fuzz offers a benefit like how we saw in Monstrosity, whereas on the other hand, when Dawson just randomly appears and offers to help Kai with kind of no benefit to himself, that is when Kai becomes non-trusting. He demonstrates both sides of the character that we have seen before now. He demonstrates his trusting side, and he demonstrates the Monstrosity side at the exact same time. So for that reason, I actually do kind of like how he acts for the most part. I do think he acts within the realm of logic, and I do think as well, it kind of makes sense considering where he was. Because if we do get more Monstrosity or Land of Monsters related shorts when it comes to Kai, it would make sense that we have Monstrosity where he wasn't really trusting at all, and then we have this one where he has his doubts, and then maybe the next one we'll see him lean more into how he was before. Because remember, we need to get Kai to the point that he was in Dragon's Rising, where he encounters Lloyd, and he is initially quite weird, a bit shadowy, a bit skeptical on who was on the bounty, but then at the same time, he was still quite trusting, and he was still quite positive when it comes to his character. So I honestly think this is a decent progression when it does come to Kai. So honestly, I do like where we were heading in these shorts for him. As for the other characters that we do get to see throughout these shorts, starting with Wildfire, she kinda is just a lot of nothing. She's basically just exposition for us when it comes to these shorts. There's nothing really to add to a character or any sort of depth like we are again with Kai. She's mainly just there to listen and to provide commentary and do the same jokes that she typically does. So I feel like judging Wildfire to any extent is not really worth it, because Wildfire's role could have been replaced by near enough anyone. I will note though that she is wearing the outfit that Kai never actually gets to see until he comes back from the Nether space, but at the same time, Kai is in the season 1 outfit, so if this is canonical like it's intended to be, I would like to know when this conversation between the two of them is actually taking place. As for all the Land of Monsters characters, Bolson is a bit strange to me personally. I do think it's a bit debatable on what was going on, and I would like to have more explanation on how the Queen of Monsters actually had a control on him, because the whole thing is that Fuzz needed to be linked to Kai to be able to do anything towards him, whereas the Queen of Monsters was kind of just remote. And then even if it was just remote wireless control, how is it that Bolson was able to betray her at the very end? I think the rules and the logic is kind of a bit dodgy when it comes to it, and I think Bolson as an overall character was just a bit weird. It'd be nice if he's just restricted to these shorts, because I'm just not really enthusiastic about seeing him ever again. That's not a bad thing, but it is just simply a case of he was there, he was fine, but the logic was just a bit weird. Diadon also kind of just doesn't really do much. She's kind of just there to move the plot, but she also has to be there because of Monstrosity. I mean, she has a couple nice moments, I guess, but for the most part that she just doesn't really do anything. So again, it kind of feels harsh to judge her, and I feel like to an extent the same thing goes for the Queen of Monsters. She turns up, she tries to kill Diadon, and then she just gets killed not long after. She overall has like maybe a minute worth of screen time. So again, I'm just kind of not really feeling too much towards the Queen of Monsters. And then finally, you've got Fuzz, and I do think it's an interesting character. I do think it's quite curious to know that Fuzz was picking Kai. I would like to know the process that Fuzz goes through, and I think for the most part, he was kind of just there. It was just a bit weird, and I just don't really care for the character of Fuzz. Also, at the end, when Kai's weird effect gets removed from him, I do find it quite interesting to note that Fuzz never necessarily does anything, or nothing really happens to him for that to be removed. I think it was just kind of a case of they just wanted Kai to go back to normal by the end of the shorts. But again, in similar vein to Bolson, I just kind of hope we don't get to see Fuzz again. I just don't really care for the character, and I think even though he had his moments, I guess, I think it's fine. But overall, it's just another interesting character, I guess, that we got to see. It goes to show that this was mainly just made to demonstrate more of Kai's mindset when it comes to the Land of Monsters, and trying to show the progression of Kai when he was at his worst in Monstrosity to the events of the first season of Dragon's Rising. And I do think it is doing that quite well. It's just, it would be nice if some of the other characters did get a little more when it comes down to it. There's only two other things I really feel like needs to be mentioned when it comes to it, and the first one I'm going to talk about is actually the inconsistencies just of the story itself. I do think for the most part, I feel like the story was just kind of rushed. I feel like they wanted more time, and I think they wanted to tell a bigger story, but they simply just never had the time. The whole thing of Kai being corrupted or transformed into this bug creature, I feel like they wanted more when it came to it, but they just simply never had the time, which ultimately is a shame because it would be nice if they did get more out of it, but at the same time, I just think they were just kind of constrained and they just did their best with what they had. But overall, I do think the logic was just a little bit near, like I said, and it does feel like they just needed to reset him by the end of the third short, so it just feels like there was more left to be desired. Do I think that means it's a bad story? Not really, because it demonstrates the progression of Kai regardless. It just demonstrates that Kai is making his way through these lands, he is doing his best, and he is trying to become a better person after the event of Monstrosity. I do like what it is doing, it's just, it would be cool if they just simply had more time to actually do it. It would be nice if instead of having, I think was essentially like 11 minutes, it could be something like Virtues of Spinjitzu, or something like Wu's Tease, where it had basically 22 minutes. I think those additional 11 minutes really would have done a lot for this, and I do hope for future they do give it more time. And then the last thing for me is going to be the case of animation. I do think animation is quite important regardless, and I do think it was nice to see that there was an interesting contrast when it came to the animation. The scenes between Kai and Wildfire is animated as Dragon's Rising typically would be. It uses just all Dragon's Rising assets. There's nothing really unique to those segments. It's just essentially a version of Dragon's Rising that was clearly cheaper made, but that kind of makes sense considering they're just shorts, not actual episodes. And then the actual flashback scenes are made more in accordance with the Wildfire shorts that we got way back when. I do think this was a better utilization of it, because I do think these shorts look better in comparison. I do think it actually does lend itself to the Kai Land of Monsters kind of aesthetic. I do wish we would get more of what we got in Monstrosity itself, but honestly, I think this animation style is actually quite nice. I do think it blends quite well in together, because it does, like I say, blend the 2D in with the 3D, and I do think it just goes quite well in this sense. So honestly, even though I was doubting at first, I again feel quite convinced when it does come to the animation. But I do think for future reference, it would be nice if we do get more of what we actually got to see in Monstrosity. But there was nothing wrong with it in my opinion. Overall though, I do think these shorts were just a little bit weird, and there was just some things in it that I wish were just simply better, and I do wish there was more of a runtime regardless. But I do think for what we got, and I do think considering that what we could have got as well could have been a lot worse, I do think what we actually have got here is a decent little short and something nice and fun until we get to Dragon's Rising Season 3 Part 2. Do I want more of it? I would definitely say yes. I would like to have more adventures when it comes to the Land of Monsters, and it does look like they're definitely banking in on that. When we'll get more, I think they said 2026, which is fine because I wasn't considering a sequel this early on, but for what we did get, I do think it was quite good. If you haven't seen it and you just wanted to watch someone's thoughts on it, here's my recommendation. Go and watch it. I do think it's better than I'm actually describing, and I do think it's not a waste of your time by any account. Like I said, it's only about 11 minutes, which is just a nice little snippet of content, and again, like I said, until Dragon's Rising. So if you haven't given it a watch, I would definitely say you should do it. But I would say, when it comes down to it, it's one of the nicer parts of Ninjago content. I don't compare it to the big seasons that we do get, but I do think for what it is quite good. But overall, what is your opinion on Kai's monstrous journey? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? Did you wish for more? Do you think I was honestly a bit too harsh on it? I would love to know your thoughts when it comes to these shorts, because I do think they're fairly interesting, and I do think there's more discussion that could be had when it comes down to it. I haven't really heard too many people even talk about these shorts, so I hope this does create some conversation and spark some debate on whether or not this was a worthy successor to Ninjago Monstrosity. But that is about it for today, you guys, and thank you very much for watching. Take care. Okay, bye!